Imagine this image, an arch of triumph, adorned with both the crimson swastika of Nazi Germany and the defiant red star of the Soviet Union. Beneath it, soldiers from both regimes, marching side by side, celebrating a victory. This wasn't a nightmare, it was September 1939, deep within a conquered Poland, a stark symbol of a chilling alliance history tried to bury. This wasn't merely a non-aggression pact. This was the true face of a brutal, secret partnership that carved up nations, fueled genocide, and ignited the inferno of World War II. What if everything you thought you knew about the origins of that war, about the Soviet Union's role, was a carefully constructed lie? The official narrative paints a picture of a triumphant people rising, a popular revolution sweeping away the old order. But the truth, stripped bare of propaganda, tells a different story. In October 1917, the Bolshevik takeover was no mass uprising. It was a coup orchestrated by a desperate minority. Out of 150 million people, perhaps 30 to 40,000 Bolsheviks, mostly soldiers, seized power in Petrograd. A sliver of a nation imposing its will through force. The people, it seemed, had other ideas. When the first truly free election for the Constituent Assembly finally arrived, the Bolsheviks garnered a mere 24% of the vote. They were resoundingly defeated by the socialist revolutionaries. Their response? Not acceptance, but brute force. Soldiers loyal to Lenin stormed the assembly, shutting down the nascent democracy. Workers who dared to protest, demanding their rightful democratic voice, were gunned down in the streets. Even the very Soviets, the workers' councils they claimed to champion, were disbanded whenever an election outcome threatened their iron grip. This was not a revolution of the people, it was the chilling dawn of a totalitarian regime. And the terror began immediately. The Cheka, Lenin's dreaded secret police, became a ruthless killing machine. In just 5 years, from 1917 to 1922, they executed an estimated 140,000 souls. To grasp the scale of this horror, consider this: the Tsarist government, over a span of 51 years, was responsible for 14,000 deaths. The Bolsheviks surpassed that grim tally tenfold in a fraction of the time. Who were the targets? Anyone. A bourgeois could be anyone who owned anything. A saboteur could be anyone who disagreed. Even a poor laborer, simply wearing a warm coat against the biting Russian winter, could be labeled an enemy of the state and summarily executed. The revolution was devouring its own, long before the world truly understood its appetite. The history books often frame the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact of August 1939 as a pragmatic, if cynical, non-aggression treaty, designed by Stalin to buy precious time. But that is a dangerous distortion, a convenient whitewash of a far darker truth. For on that very day, alongside the public declaration, a secret protocol was signed, sealed, and delivered. This wasn't about non-aggression, it was a blueprint for conquest. Hitler and Stalin, two of history's most brutal dictators, sat down and meticulously carved up Eastern Europe. Poland, Finland, the Baltic states, they were all just lines on a map, designated spoils of war for their respective empires. The stage was set, not for peace, but for unparalleled aggression. The ink was barely dry when Hitler unleashed his Wehrmacht on Poland. Just 7 days later, the invasion began. But the horror was only half complete. 17 days after the initial assault, Soviet forces poured across the border, invading the other half of Poland. This was no coincidence. This was synchronized aggression. And what followed was a grotesque display of newfound friendship. Nazi and Soviet armies met, not in battle, but in joint military parades. An arch of triumph, adorned with both swastikas and the communist star, stood as a monument to their shared conquest. The image is searing, undeniable evidence of an alliance many still refuse to acknowledge. Their bond deepened. On September 28, 1939, a new document emerged from the shadows, the German-Soviet Treaty of Friendship and Frontier. Friendship. It was a chilling euphemism. This treaty reaffirmed their shared imperial ambitions, complete with a detailed, partitioned map of Poland, personally signed by Stalin himself with his distinctive blue pen. This wasn't a desperate gambit for time, it was a firm declaration of partnership, a joint venture into the abyss of war and territorial expansion. As the Second World War erupted, as England and France reeled under the merciless assault of Hitler's war machine, the Soviet Union stood not as an adversary, but as a critical enabler. Millions of tons of essential resources flowed from Soviet lands into Nazi Germany: oil, grains, minerals. This wasn't merely trade, it was a lifeline, directly fueling the very engines of destruction that were ravaging Europe. Could Hitler have launched his blitzkrieg with such ferocity without Stalin's consistent, massive material support? It's highly doubtful. The Soviet Union was, quite literally, feeding the beast. The assistance went even deeper. Russian ports became safe havens for German U-boats, allowing them to refuel and resupply, extending their reach to terrorize Atlantic shipping lanes. Soviet military bases transmitted critical navigation signals, guiding Nazi aircraft through the darkness, allowing them to strike their targets with deadly precision. This was not neutrality, this was active collaboration, a deliberate partnership against the Western powers. The narrative of Soviet opposition to fascism unravels under the weight of these damning facts. The true climax of this unholy alliance arrived in November 1940. Vyacheslav Molotov, Stalin's foreign minister, traveled to Berlin. His mission? To negotiate the Soviet Union's formal entry into the Tripartite Pact, aligning Russia with Germany, Italy, and Imperial Japan. Think about that, the supposed bastion of communism seeking to join forces with the most aggressive fascist regimes on earth. Stalin himself sent a telegram, outlining the Soviet conditions for joining the Axis and, chillingly, for dividing the world. Hitler, ever the opportunist and already planning his grand betrayal, simply ignored the overture. He had no intention of sharing the spoils. But the intent, the willingness, from Stalin's side, was undeniable. The Soviet Union was not merely a reluctant bystander, it was an eager participant in a global scheme of totalitarian domination. With their shared conquest secured, the brutality escalated. In the eastern half of Poland, now under Soviet occupation, a horrific campaign of ethnic cleansing began. Approximately 1.5 million Poles, entire communities, were rounded up like cattle, crammed into cargo trains, and shipped to the desolate, frozen gulags of Kazakhstan. This was not a relocation, it was a death sentence. Within just 3 years, an estimated 500,000 of these innocent souls perished, victims of starvation, disease, and forced labor. The Soviet regime, like its Nazi counterpart, was driven by a ruthless ideology of expansion and ethnic purity. Then came the inevitable betrayal. On June 22, 1941, Operation Barbarossa began. Hitler unleashed his armies upon the Soviet Union, shattering the fragile, sinister alliance. Stalin, so comfortable, so trusting in his pact with Hitler, dismissed the initial warnings as mere disinformation. He forbade his commanders from counterattacking German forces at the border, paralyzed by disbelief. In a desperate, pathetic attempt to avert the inevitable, he even tried to use the Bulgarian ambassador as an intermediary, begging for a peace deal, offering to cede vast territories. But the Nazis were relentless. Their only interest was total annihilation. The Soviet Union, often portrayed as an ideological foe of fascism, only entered the war against Hitler because it was itself betrayed and invaded. Survival, not ideology, became the driving force. For decades, the truth was suppressed, denied, and twisted. The Soviet Union, and even Molotov himself until his death. In the 1980s, vehemently denied the existence of the secret protocols, dismissing them as imperialist lies. The world was fed a fabricated history, a narrative designed to sanitize the Soviet role in enabling the most destructive war humanity had ever known. It wasn't until the 1990s, with the collapse of the Soviet Union and the opening of its secret archives, that the full, unvarnished truth finally emerged. The documents, undeniable and chilling, laid bare the extent of the Nazi-Soviet conspiracy. The photographic evidence of joint parades, the maps, the signed treaties, all confirmed the dark reality that had been hidden for half a century. The idea that Stalin signed the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact merely to buy time for his military is a myth, crumbling under the weight of historical evidence. The facts are clear, undeniable. The true Soviet objective was audacious, ruthless imperial expansion. They cast their lot with the aggressors, providing the essential resources and strategic partnership that allowed Hitler to ignite the Second World War. They didn't stumble into war, they actively enabled it. Only when Hitler's betrayal turned on them, when their own survival hung in the balance, did they switch sides, becoming reluctant defenders against the very monster they had helped create. This is the unvarnished truth, a testament to the brutal, opportunistic nature of totalitarian power, and a stark reminder that history is often far darker than the stories we are told.